Hello and welcome to We the Game Changers. I'm your host, Beth Knox, and today I am so excited to be talking with my guest, Jen Barnes, CEO and founder of Rough Tumble Pub, Seattle's first ever bar that prioritizes women's sports. Jen is also an owner of the newly formed Salmon Bay FC women's soccer team. She's changing the game in how we consume women's sports, how we talk about women's sports, and most recently, how we are investing in those sports. So thanks for joining us for We the Game Changers. Hi, Jen. It's so great to have you here. I'm so excited to have you on our still relatively new podcast with a video component. And of course, it's called We the Game Changers. And you were a natural guest to have on our show. So I'm so pleased that you could join me.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I'm really excited.
All right, well, let's get into it. So I'm excited to talk about all of your many projects, but let's start with a little bit of background first. So you grew up playing sports, you played softball, you rode, you even ran track, I think.
Yes.
And then as you moved into your career, first of all, I think you started kind of in, we'll say the food industry.
I did.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, but you had a variety of different aspects in your career.
Yes.
Can you share a little bit about your personal and professional journey, just to give us some context of how you ended up in this confluence of owning a sports bar and investing in women's sports?
Yeah, absolutely. My parents owned a business, so I grew up in like small business. And I think as is the case with most kids who grow up in a family business, you learn a lot about how to run a business. And, you watch your examples are entrepreneurs themselves. And so that was just an area that I grew up in pretty early. Being in that kind of environment oftentimes allows you opportunities to be in leadership roles or in management positions much earlier than maybe others. And so I certainly had those experiences. And by the time I was entering employment that wasn't family business, I had enough background to just sort of start executing at a different level. That was, I think, a treat, a privilege for sure. And so, I pretty quickly went into the corporate world. I was in food industry with my family, and then on my own, managing multiple restaurants and stuff at a pretty young age, like 17, 18 years old.
Oh, wow.
And then moved into corporate. I knew I wanted to learn all the things outside of the family business area and outside the restaurant world. And I spent a good deal of time, about 15, 20 years in the legal field, actually. So a lot of law firms around here in Seattle, national law firms, international law firms, doing kind of all the roles but being a lawyer. And so, it was, from my perspective, a really great way to learn how to be a generalist. And I think that all of the great entrepreneurs that I know are really good generalists. And so that was my strategy, and that's kind of where I went with it.
That's so interesting. I have the exact same experience in that I was always the utility player.
Yep.
They could put me in a lot of different roles and know that I could manage people, even if I didn't have the experience in IT, for instance, which I ran that department one time.
Me too, yeah.
Or HR. I didn't have experience, but I certainly knew how to manage people and how to get the most out of them. And it's a great learning experience. But when you are in that leadership role, and then you can at least relate to what
exactly. I was just going to say, I think being a good leader, being a good manager, especially when you're trying to execute and get other people to help lift together, you really need to understand, at least this was my strategy, to understand what all those roles mean, what it takes to do those roles, because you also have a better appreciation, you know what to ask for, etc. So that was, I think, a good strategy for you as well.
Right. So, lack of access to watching women's sports when you're simply wanting to, get out of the house and be able to take that in, is essentially what drove you to create Rough Tumble.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that process? What was that internal dialogue like for you to get you from the thinking that it was a good concept to actually making it happen? Interestingly,
it was a pretty short time frame. it's not as though this was a dream for many years. It was very much of a lightning bolt moment. I think you hear about them. This really was one. I was very frustrated that I couldn't watch women's sports with friends in a bar pub environment, and I was like, well, I'm going to change this. And I had, I was thinking about this, preparing for this meeting or this interview, and one of the things that I do really know well is being a women's sports fan, or being a sports fan in general. Mm-hmm. I've spent a lot of time going out and watching games and being a fan. And so, I think getting from the idea of doing it to actually executing, it was 8 weeks. So it was pretty quick. I actually had to try to talk myself out of it. We were coming out of COVID, right? Yeah. Is going into the restaurant world really a great idea? It had imploded. I was like, well, maybe I should stay in the corporate world and build my retirement plan for more, So I did try to talk myself out of it, but it was a pretty short period of time before I just moved forward with it. It was good timing.
So recently you participated in a panel discussion at the Seattle Sports Commission's
Yes.
Women in Leadership Breakfast, which we loved having you there.
Yes. Oh, thank you.
And you were a part of the panel on the business case for investing in women. And it was so eye-opening to hear from you some of the commentary that you received, or
Yes.
the pushback, as you were launching a women's sports-focused bar, which was that you were excluding half of the population,
Mm-hmm.
which that just... it was so striking to the irony
Yes.
of that comment. So tell me about how you responded to that pushback and still moved forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. The women's sports industry sector has grown 300% since 2021. And that's a very, very fast growth trajectory. And it's going to continue to blow those numbers out of the water over the next few years. So what we all kind of know and experience and are starting to see on a more regular basis in women's sports is something that was absolutely foreign 2.5 years ago. And when I first came up with this idea, in the process of building support for it and seeking financing and seeking funding opportunities and that kind of thing, I got more pushback than you can imagine. It was because it had never been done. And I'm sure this is the case with any new idea, anything that's going to break a mold, right? It's like, well, how is that going to be successful? It can't be successful. Nobody's ever done it before, therefore it can't work. And so it does take a lot of confidence, right? And a lot of belief. And you kind of do have to go somewhat on instinct, right? But how do you monetize that? How do you, luckily, data was just starting to get published about women's sports. Finally, studies were being done. So I had data points and that kind of thing. But I was told by more than one person that this wasn't a good idea because I was excluding half the population, when in fact all we were doing was actually including 51% of the population.
That's correct.
So yeah, it was a very different mindset, and it's my approach was to just provide more education.
That was going to be my question. Did you expend energy trying to convince those negative comments, or to turn them, or did you just keep moving forward on your path?
Yeah, I absolutely did. I don't think I went down a really long path of trying to convince them. It was really just quite easy to do with data, right? And so I would say, well, in fact, somewhere around 85% of consumer spending decisions are made by women. And so, if you're creating spaces that are pretty much exclusively for men and men's sports, you're missing out on revenue generating opportunities. That's clear, right? And in fact, while women's sports only took up 3% of sports media programming time back when I was getting going on this, they've increased, they're projected by Deloitte, increased to 5%, 6%, 15%, 20% now. In 2025, it's going to go up to 20%.
Amazing.
So, once you have data points, you're able to kind of sustain those conversations a little bit better. I definitely had some interesting ones where I was I was often asked if my husband was going to join me in these meetings when I was the owner of this business and unmarried.
Fascinating.
So, we still have a long way to go, but I think it's really, if you can have conversations with educated data points, it makes a big difference.
So tell our listeners a little bit about Rough and Tumble, and have you found that the full population is coming to your bar?
Yes, it's I'd love to do an actual study on this, but I'm there often, and so I can tell you that if you're just looking at a dual binary gender system, we're right around 55% women, 45% men.
That's fantastic.
It's very blended.
Yeah.
And the age diversity, it's fantastic. So we're all ages all the time. That was really important to me to create, even though I'm engineering equality in this space right now, it was really important to me that young people experience that so that they could see what was possible, or the more often, if they came up more often, that they experience this as real life. So we have we could have like newborns and, a lot of, I think one of my favorite groups of guests are actually the pre-Title IX women who come in. So we'll have grandmothers and babies and everything in between. It's great.
And they're all watching women's sports while they're enjoying a great meal.
Absolutely. Yeah. And men's, because that's really, I wanted to build a place that was purpose built for equality, and that meant watching both men's and women's sports and being, not having to leave the place to go catch the rain game, or, if you're watching the rain game to, leave to go watch the Seahawks game. So you get to do both.
Well, and I have to say, I've been there several times with friends, with employees, and every time I have that sense of, oh, I'm home. Yeah. It just feels so great to be in Rough and Tumble. So highly recommend all your listeners.
Thank you very much.
You need to go there.
Thank you.
So now, just getting back on that, kind of the pushback side of it, being a disruptor is part of changing the game. It's necessary. Yep. What were some of your takeaways through that process? What did you learn about yourself in being a disruptor? And maybe any guidance that you might have for our listeners who are facing a disruption in their own world?
Yeah. I think anybody who's a disruptor comes up there, they have a firm belief that their idea is right. Stick with that. I think follow your instinct is probably your intuition, your instinct is right. And one thing that I experienced and continue to experience, but somewhat less so now that Rough and Tumble is more established, is, people are we're going to always be trying to convince you to do it a different way. And I think you really need to just follow your vision, your idea, follow your gut instinct. And, my mom, when I was quite young, really ingrained in my sister and I, that our intuition was right, and how to hear it, how to seek it out, how to listen to it. And I think that was the thing that got me, I think, to hear. And it's the thing that I often encourage, especially other women in the industry that they're going into, to just listen to their gut instincts.
I love hearing that because for my story, I had to learn to trust my instincts over time. Yep. And to have confidence in my own leadership capabilities.
There's a group of about 30 of us women, business leaders in the Seattle area, who funded this new women's soccer team. It's
in Ballard.
In Ballard, yes. So Ballard FC has been in Seattle now for 3 years. They're USL champions, I think by their year 2.
Yes, it's incredible.
Really incredible, wonderful organization, super well run. And well led, and it just felt like really exciting to be part of bringing a women's team in soccer to, and this is a pre-development or a pre-professional league, so it's really part of the development structure. Europe is really well known for development in the soccer arena. Right. We grow these kids up into professional athletes, but in the United States, we're still kind of building this. Mm-hmm. So we've got the MLS, we've got the NWSL, We've got college, high school, and pre-college, pre-high school, like premier select teams. But there's generally has been this gap between college and professional. And so how do we develop kids and youth and top level athletes to that next level? That's where USL comes in. There's been an explosion of women's teams that are coming out of the USL W group. I think there's something like 80 teams that came online over the last year. So, this is great because it's creating all these opportunities for women athletes to do something besides college. So a lot of women athletes in particular kind of age out after college, and that's it. So it gives opportunities for women to play outside of college, but it also gives opportunities for women who are currently in college or maybe didn't have access to college athletics, and this opportunity to grow into professional soccer if that's what they want to do. That's really exciting. I feel like super excited that I get to do this with some other women athletes as well. So we have a group of women athletes here who have played for the Reign or play for the Reign now, that we get to do this together. And it's, I think, extremely rewarding for all of us to create opportunities for other women that they didn't have, that I didn't have, that we don't have. Every day that we're doing something for Salmon Bay FC, it's something that has not been done before. And it also means that nobody will have to not have that going forward. So it's really exciting.
It feels like the next iteration of Title IX.
Yeah.
Like this is the way to advance it. If you remember from a couple of years ago when it was the 50th anniversary of Title IX,
Yep.
Maya Mendoza-Ekstrom, earlier guest on We the Game Changers, she spoke about, okay, we've grown up now with Title IX, our generation.
Yep.
What's next? How do we advance this? And it really feels like Salmon Bay FC is an opportunity to do just that.
It is, and there's going to be more and more of these. I think I hope that we see more and more of these teams along the West Coast, around the Northwest, because we want to be playing as many as possible too, right? But the more we create opportunities for women, the stronger our communities are going to be.
Well, and to that point, Seattle is known for its support in general of women's sports.
Yes.
Where do you feel our region is around sports equity? What are the opportunities for continued growth? What do you think is in the future for us as a region?
I often say that I think Seattle is the best women's sports city in the world, just hands down. So, we have the Reign, which is our NWSL team, and it's one of the founding teams of the entire league. We have the Storm. We have countless semi-pro teams here in women's sports, many of which a lot of us go to and enjoy. And then we have incredible university athletics. We've got Big Ten at the University of Washington, and incredible athletes come out of that school. Just going down the street to a UW game, you get to watch some of the best athletes in the world. So, all of that comes together. I think it's a progressive city. We have, the highest percentage of women business owners in the country here. There's, I think, a lot of support for gender equity already. Then you add to that this passionate sports town. We have all but the NBA team when you think about the big leagues, right now. And I think that's really unusual. So there are other great cities in our country that have women's sports teams in them. I don't think they are as advanced as us. I don't think they are as well invested as us. And because of those two things, we have a fantastic women's sports fan base, because we have a fan base that's growing up with women's sports being invested in an equitable fashion in our city for a long time. So, you can have women's sports teams and not have the fan base, or the other way around, and we have both.
Well, and I think it is a continued opportunity to nurture the commercial side of it, meaning the corporate support, so that we not only can continue to grow the sport, but that development side of it. And where do young girls come into this, and how are we fostering that process? Because we do know that too often young girls, especially once they get to middle school, they drop out of sports, and they're not staying active for whatever the reason is. So I think that's the opportunity for us in the future, is to really nurture that piece of it.
Absolutely. And I think we're really seeing that in the hockey side of things. I think Seattle is well known for being big in soccer and lacrosse and ultimate, but hockey's become a big thing. And I love what the Kraken have done to build a community of soccer players, or a community of hockey players. And so the Iceplex is, always full of kids taking lessons. And I think as a sports community, we've really been preparing for this moment to bring women's hockey here. And that kind of thing is, the more we can create opportunities outside of, we have all the teams. Now we're creating opportunities. We get to create opportunities for young athletes to experience what it's like to play these sports, because guess what? They can see that they have a potential future in them as well. And that's something that we get to show the whole life cycle of here. So yeah,
it's exciting to look ahead to what we can do.
Yeah.
I just feel like we have such a strong foundation here in women's sports.
Yes.
So to me, it's like, let's think big,
yeah,
dream big, and what does that look like? So
yeah,
I'm excited to be on that journey with you.
Yeah.
So one of the questions we like to ask our guests here, because of the name of this podcast is We the Game Changers, and I'm curious if there was a game changer in your life, a particular person who influenced the person that you became.
I think the number one person who comes to mind is my grandmother. I have this very strong matrilineal line of strong women, and I'm a fourth generation Seattleite, and I watched my great grandmother and my grandmother come across the country, and have some of the two first businesses at the bottom of the Smith Tower, and my family is strong women. So I think that is the thing that kind of hits the most. But if I think outside of those obvious ones, the one that really hits home for me on a regular basis is Billie Jean King.
Yeah.
And I just, I think about Rough and Tumble wouldn't exist without her. Megan Rapinoe wouldn't exist without her. Sue Bird, the Storm, the NWSL, the WNBA. She has made women's sports possible. She's made pay equity possible. Those things can extrapolate out to much more than just sports. I think about the fact that she started the Women's Sports Foundation with $5,000. And today, 9 of the top 15 top paid 15 athletes in 2024 are women tennis players. And that $5,000 has changed the trajectory of not just women athletes and not just women's sports, but women and gender equality in the workforce, at home, etc. It's made your position possible, what you do on a daily basis, what I get to do, and it's going to have far-reaching and long-term effects. So when I look at what she did with very little, and how long it's taken to have as much effect as she had, and continues to have, it's very inspiring to me, and it allows me to know that even on those hard days and the days when things maybe not going perfectly, that we will get there. That's a good thing to have.
I think that's such a good point. It's so we live in a society of instantaneous gratification. It becomes a frequent need for people, and
Yes.
I think for a really good leader, you have to be able to play the long game and
Yes.
trust that your actions today, you may not see the results of that immediately, but within time, and you may not even live to see those impacts, perhaps.
Right.
But trusting again in the long game, and knowing that what you're doing will have a positive impact.
I look at just what she's like in person, how she takes up space very calmly and very completely.
Right.
And I think that, the more we can each do that, the more we will also be able to affect good change. So yeah, I do think the women's sports industry sector is exploding right now because there's finally investment in it. But it does make everything that I do in the industry that I work in on a daily basis feel like it's moving at lightning speed, because it kind of is. And sometimes I just have to remember, like, the goals that I have for Rough and Tumble and for women's sports and gender equity are still going to take time.
Right.
Yeah. So
that is true. So another area that you've been involved in is Q Law for the LGBTQ Washingtonians here. Tell us a little bit more about that involvement and what is the primary focus for you?
Human rights, fighting for LGBTQIA plus rights in the state of Washington has been something that I've been involved in for a long time, dating back to, I don't know, the 90s when we were trying to initially pass same-sex marriage laws.
Right.
And so I was lucky enough to be part of the group that did pass same-sex marriage laws back in 2013. And then, just it's been a part of my life. I came out when I was 16. I grew up as a queer woman in Seattle. And anytime that I had the ability, the tools, the access to be able to help make something a little better for any part of the community, it felt like something that I should and could do. So with QLA in particular, I was on the board there for a number of years, cycling through. My last role was president, and it was, QLA is the legal rights and advocacy organization for the state of Washington for queer people. I think it's going to be particularly important in the coming few years.
What have you found that you've been able to give to this, not only the organization, but to the accomplishments? And then what have you gotten back from this process?
Really, I think the big thing was just being part of the board. The foundation, the organization itself was not particularly board run. It is run by the staff. And so we were more, or served as more of an advisor role. It was a big challenge to find ways to attract and retain people on the board who were not sort of your classic board members. In order to be successful in representing a lot of different people, it needs to have input, advice, lived experiences, and through the lenses of people who have a lot of different backgrounds as well. And so that was something that we really worked to shift the organization toward. And I think that that's something that's been pretty successful.
Well, and that's such a great leadership quality, to be able to remove yourself from the component of it, and say, what does this entity need, and am I the right one to be here? And rather than egocentric, which most of us enter that in that mindset, but being able to step back from that egocentric place and deciding, what does this organization need now? That's a sign of a true leader as well. And
the board that I got to work with, the board members that I was on the board with at the time, we all were very well aligned on this. And so it was a really great experience to be able to do this together. There wasn't, we all wanted to see the board move into a different direction. So it was really great.
So Jen, you're obviously making waves in your current role as an owner of a pub and an owner of a team. Are there other spaces that you see that could stand to be disrupted? And do you want to be part of that? Or is it something that you just would like to see happen in the future?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is a huge overarching one. It's women's sports. I want to continue to affect change and get to a point of true equality when it comes to men's and women's sports. With a long way to go. As much of an explosion as women's sports is having right now, we still have a long way to go to get to that 50-50 spot. So I do want to continue to see that change, and I want to be part of it. And I think there's a lot of different ways to do it, and there's a lot of game changing, a lot of disrupting that needs to take place. So I chose to invest in women's sports through a vehicle that that we live in and exist in as Rough and Tumble Pub. It is about creating access to women's sports, creating access to viewing them that in general we don't have. So that's disrupting the sports bar space, right? When you think about the fact that I was the just the second in the entire world to ever do this, and the only place that is purpose built for equality, gender equality in sports watching. Still, we have a lot of room. So, there's a lot of cities who need places like this. There's a lot of countries who need places like this. We are starting to see that change, and it's my intention to be part of that. I have always had a growth strategy that, is outside of Seattle. So that, but I also think that, it's what's interesting about the sports world in general is that men's sports have generally plateaued. There's a lot of data to support this. Some sports are on the men's side they've kind of flatlined. They've done everything.
Right.
And so I think, one of the things I talk about a lot is that the women's sports industry sector is the world's our oyster. We get to create it, we get to build it, we get to expand it however we want to. We can look at some great lessons, some successes on the men's sports side, and then use them or not use them, right? So I think that's really great. But I think one of the interesting things that is actually going to start, we'll start seeing more discussion about sooner than later, is how do we change the men's side? How do we start taking lessons from the women's side and applying them or integrating them to the men's side? Because if men's sports as a sector are starting to flatline a little bit, then we need to liven that up. We need to shift that. We need to change that. And so, women's sports are doing a lot of really successful things right now. And I think there's going to be a lot of really interesting conversation about how to extrapolate that into the other side. And really start to share some of those learned lessons. I'd love to be part of that conversation, and continue to disrupt both sides.
I love that. And then I also love hearing this idea of a growth strategy for Rough and Tumble.
Yeah.
Are you actively supporting other women who are looking to start their own pub?
Yeah, so
in other cities?
Yeah, there are I think something like 20 different ones that are trying to come online around the world this coming year, and I think a lot of them have a good shot at being successful, because Rough and Tumble is proof positive and has a lot of exemplars. All of these women tend to reach out and ask for advice and help and stuff like that. So that's really fun to be able to assist on that. But the goal has always been to have more Rough and Tumbles in the world. And so I think, now that home base, headquarters is settled and in good place after 2 years, which is well ahead of schedule.
That's fantastic.
Then I can start thinking about how to grow this in other ways. And I think, Rough and Tumble is so much more than just a sports bar or a sports pub. It really is a lifestyle brand. It is something that is more of a movement. And so I think there's a lot of different elements to Rough and Tumble that we'll see starting to come out in the next year or so.
It's a great segue to my last question is, what is a leadership principle that is part of your North Star? What do you rely on a regular basis?
Kindness. I really think that I try all the time to make decisions and interact with human beings, and think about decision making, and leadership and goals and everything really with a sense of kindness. Our world is made up of a very diverse group of human beings with a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different learned experiences. And every single one of those is what makes up a better whole. And so there's no one right way to do it. There's no one right way to be. And to remember and live in a way that is generous of spirit is, I think, really important.
One last game changer question for you. There are lots of people who are swimming upstream. They're trying to disrupt the space, and they are getting that pushback along this journey. What advice do you have for those people that are really trying to make that difference?
I certainly did, right? And I still do. It can be extremely isolating to especially be a woman in business. And I think, if you find that you're in a space where people are not backing your idea, that aren't backing you, they're not supporting you, then go find a group that is.
Yes.
And that is much easier said than done in a lot of cases. But do the hard work to find that, because you need people to be your sponsors, your supporters, your fan base, whatever term you're going to use. So find them. Use LinkedIn, ask friends, go to places where you think you might meet those people, because they will come out in droves to help you when you're in the right space. And if you're in the wrong one, you're just going to, maybe your really great idea will never be nurtured and will never get to see the light of day. So I think that's probably the biggest one.
Well, and I think even if your game changer idea doesn't come to fruition, being part of an ecosystem of supporters and coaching you through that process, that can be the value that you take away, even if the idea doesn't actually happen.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of really great ideas that are not going to be monetized, that don't actually make sense, that don't get the support of,
it's not the right time.
It's not the right time. We're not ready for it. A million different reasons, right? And so when you listen to your intuition, this is a great idea, you look for somebody who's going to back you on it, and you just can't find it, and you've tried a bunch of different places. Maybe it's not the time. Maybe it's not the idea that's going to take off. It doesn't mean it's a bad one. But I do think, women in particular are 100% my biggest supporters. And I think, as women in particular, find other women who will support you. They're everywhere. We don't have a lot of extra time usually.
True.
But absolutely, if you can find those women who will be your sponsors, there are a lot of us out there in the world doing great things now. And we're here. I think every single one of us are here to take a pause and help each other out as much as we can.
I love that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for our launch season of We the Game Changers. Be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your content. And please share this with your network. Encourage someone else to explore their leadership journey and get inspired by game changers of every kind. This season, we'll be talking with executive chefs, professional athletes, founders, and more, each with their own unique leadership voices. From confident public speakers to introverted role models. Wherever you are in your leadership journey, all are welcome. Follow along on Seattle Sports Commission's social media and join us for our next episode.